Coming up, Northamptonshire gears up to welcome thousands of fans to the British Grand Prix.
Why the bells will toll again in a church in a Herefordshire village.
And the family of ducks who've taken up residence at their local. That's ITV News Central at 6. Coming up, 4 men have been arrested after a 32-year-old man dies from stab wounds in Birmingham. Details next.
The main stories from here and around the world coming up in half an hour. That's after the news from where you are.
Hello and welcome to ITV News Central. On the programme tonight, 4 men are questioned over the murder of a father who was stabbed in front of hundreds of people.
The family's devastated, as you would expect any family to be.
Why serious accidents in 20-mile-per-hour zones have gone up in the last year.
Newly restored bells will ring out in Herefordshire in memory of a First World War veteran.
And Duck Dynasty, the feathered family who've settled at their local pub.
Good evening. Several roads in the Sparkbrook area of Birmingham remain cordoned off tonight as police continue to investigate a fight between 2 groups of men on Wednesday that left 1 dead and 2 others in hospital with gunshot and stab injuries.
4 men have now been arrested on suspicion of murder. It's now thought an ongoing feud may have led to the incident. Callum Watkinson reports.
As the police maintain a strong presence in Sparkbrook after a violent brawl on Wednesday night, at the scene, flowers for the young father who lost his life. A post-mortem examination has revealed Ikram Elahi died from a stab wound to the throat, not a gunshot as was thought at first. His family has yet to identify him formally. Their local MP visited them yesterday.
I went and saw them yesterday afternoon, and obviously they're distraught over what happened, and they are very strongly of the opinion that the person who was killed was just the wrong person in the wrong place.
4 men arrested for violent disorder have been arrested again, now on suspicion of murder. It's thought this death may be part of an ongoing feud between 2 different groups. Police and politicians are discouraging speculation and encouraging calm.
Sparkbrook is a very homogeneous community. Different groups live cheek by jowl with each other, and they get on very well together. The police have got very much an open mind at the moment as to what was behind it, what motivated it. And my attitude is you should leave the police to do their investigation.
Of the 2 other men taken to hospital, one who was shot is stable, the other who was stabbed remains in a critical condition. The police will maintain an increased presence here over the weekend, but they say there is no reason for the people here to fear any more incidents of this kind. Callum Watkinson, ITV News, Sparkbrook.
In other news, the wife of the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner, Bob Jones, has said it's disrespectful to call an election before he's even been laid to rest. The 59-year-old died suddenly in his sleep on Tuesday. A by-election was triggered by 2 electors making a formal demand, which means voters will now go to the polls next month. Council leaders in Birmingham had hoped the campaign would be delayed until after his funeral.
The Transport Secretary has said it's vital to get the best people working on HS2 after it emerged that 30 staff could be better paid than the Prime Minister. Patrick McLaughlin said the proposed salaries were within the budget set and would involve hiring engineers with established skills, but he said all salaries would have to be approved by the Treasury.
For centuries, asbestos was seen as a lifesaver. Its fire-retardant properties were put to use in homes, offices, schools and hospitals around the world. It was only in recent years that its potential as a killer was realised.
Well, today in Birmingham, those who've lost loved ones to the incurable cancer it can cause gathered to push for more public money to help find a cure. Andy Bevan reports.
Rarely do the voices in a council chamber join in harmony, but today there's no argument about the agenda. These are the family members of men and women who've died from or are living with mesothelioma, an incurable form of lung cancer brought on by exposure to asbestos dust. They want the government to fund more research into finding new drug treatments or even a cure. One single inhaled fibre of this naturally occurring mineral can prove fatal, sometimes lying dormant in the body for decades before triggering infection. Asbestos has been mined and used since Roman times, yet it was only banned in this country 14 years ago. Many buildings like schools and hospitals still have it buried inside their walls and ceilings. Figures released by the Health and Safety Executive this week show that 2,535 people died from mesothelioma in 2012, up around 10% on the previous year. And according to the main speaker at today's meeting, a leading oncologist at Leicester University Hospitals, those numbers will continue to rise.
We therefore need to act, I think, as a health emergency, and given that we're now in an exciting era of new drug development, I think it's important to harness that new knowledge actually for patient benefit.
Any breakthrough will come too late for Worcestershire carpenter Michael Reedman. He died in 2012, aged 66, after spending years cutting up asbestos sheets for use in fire doors. His widow says, like most tradesmen in the past, he had no idea of the danger he was exposing himself to.
He was a super fit guy, and I think because he was so fit, that's why he possibly lasted 13 months. But then for the last 13 weeks of Mike's life, unfortunately, he was bedridden. He was at home. We kept him at home. But it's a horrible disease, and a lot of people don't know about it.
And unfortunately, many public buildings and homes still have asbestos in them, and there's no planned removal of asbestos from schools or public buildings.
According to the British Lung Foundation, somebody dies from mesothelioma in the UK every 5 hours, and that number is due to reach a peak in 2016. For now, Action Mesothelioma Day is an annual event, but those marking it this year and standing in silence to remember the loved ones already lost hope one day it won't be necessary. Andy Bevan, ITV News.
Sales of MG cars have risen by more than 800%, according to figures released today by the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. The firm, which is based at Longbridge in Birmingham, says much of its success is down to the recent launch of the MG3 Super Mini. So far this year, the firm, which is celebrating its 90th anniversary, has sold 1,204 cars.
MG is a very famous brand, a mark that's synonymous with the UK. To see that coming back is fantastic news, and especially for the West Midlands. The West Midlands, to a large extent, has a tremendous automotive footprint, with Jaguar Land Rover very much based there and operating globally from there. So increasing strength in the West Midlands market is good for business.
Now, potentially not great motoring news now, because drivers are being warned to plan their travel during this summer's full closure of the A38 tunnels in Birmingham. The warning comes as work on the St Chad's and Queensway tunnels gets underway tonight. With 2 weeks of overnight closures between 10 p.m. and 6 o'clock in the morning, they'll then be closed completely until September. Drivers are urged against complacency after many who used public transport during last year's refurbishment have said they won't do so this time.
We've got an online survey polling people to see what their intentions are for travel plans, and so far the people that we've surveyed, less than half of them that changed their travel plans last year have said that they will do the same this year. Now that's a major concern to us, because if we don't get the buy-in of the travelling public, then there will definitely be congestion around the city centre when we carry out these works.
So plan ahead is the message. You can get the latest on the tunnel closures if you head to our website, including information on the diversions in place. As ever, the address itv.com/central. Now, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits are being introduced on streets across Birmingham. The City Council is keen to introduce the restrictions in residential and built-up areas in an attempt to cut accidents and road deaths. The scheme is costing millions, but officials believe that cutting speed limits will not only save lives but will also save money.
However, the Institute of Advanced Motorists says the number of accidents in 20-mile-an-hour limit zones has increased across the country. It's released figures which show serious accidents are up by 26% and slight accidents are up by 17%.
Although by contrast, it says serious accidents on roads with a 30-mile limit have gone down 9%, and they've also fallen by 7% on roads with a 40 limit.
We're joined by Peter Roger from the Institute of Advanced Motorists. Peter, why do you think the figures have gone up in 20-mile-an-hour zones?
Nobody actually knows why they've gone up, which is one of the things that's making us ask the question and make the point. Nobody knows how much 20-mile-an-hour road we've got now, so we can't do a rate comparison. We can only compare crude numbers of figures. So we know that the serious injuries and the deaths have gone up by over a quarter, but we don't know how that relates to road mileage.
Although many councils, Peter, are saying that there are more 20-mile-an-hour zones than there used to be, so statistically you would perhaps expect those figures to go up slightly. Is that a fair assumption?
It's a very fair point. There is much more 20-mile-an-hour road than there used to be. Nobody knows how much more on a countrywide basis, but you wouldn't expect the figures to rise by over a quarter if the 20-mile-an-hour limit was as effective as we'd hoped it would be. So there is a question being raised about how effective a measure it is, given the cost that it incurs in creating it.
So are you actually opposed to the limits, or do you think that more should be done to enforce the 20-mile-an-hour limit itself?
What we're saying is this doesn't work as well as it was expected to, and we need to find out why. We don't have the information to be able to make good value judgments about either whether it's working as well as it should or what's going wrong. And you need to know what the problem is before you work out the solution.
In terms of what those solutions may be, though, I guess slapping up a sign saying 20 miles per hour in some areas just isn't enough to get drivers to adhere to it.
No, it probably isn't. And as a driver, if you drive around towns, if you look at the road, how do you know what the speed limit is? We're all trained, we're all programmed to think that it'll be 30 unless it says otherwise. So unless there is something to tell you it's 20, the tendency is to conclude it's 30 because for decades that's how it's been. So if the limit is to be 20, it needs to be obvious to drivers that actually we want them to go slower here.
OK, we have to leave it there. Peter Roger from the Institute of Advanced Motorists, thank you very much for joining us.